Okay, this is section 13.6. It's mostly a easy section, but I'm going to start with one that's pretty difficult, but the rest of them after this, the next 5 examples will be pretty easy. So we've got u minus 1 equals the square root of negative 3u plus 13. And off to the side, we'll write square root cannot equal a negative. And in most cases, you'll have something like, we'll just say the square root of x equals negative 5. So pretty easy. It's equal to a negative, so we'd say no solution. But this one, not quite so clear cut. It just depends on what u is. If we come back here and we find out that, let's say we work this out and we find out u is 5. So 5 minus 1, the square root now is equal to 5 minus 1. 5 minus 1 is 4, so then the square root would be equal to 4. That's fine. But if you were, let's say, negative 3, let's say we work this out and we get u equals negative 3. Negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. So then we'd have the square root equal to negative 4, and there'd be no solution. So in a lot of these, you'll end up with something like u equals negative 3, u equals 5. And in this case, we throw out the negative 3 because the negative 3 would make the square root at the beginning equal to a negative. Okay, so we'll keep that in mind. And when we get done working this out, we're going to come back to the beginning and we're going to check our answer. So if the square root is equal to a variable, we got to come back and check it. Beyond that, what we're going to do if we've got a equation with a radical, we're going to first square or cube both sides. Square or cube both sides. In this case, since this is a square root, we've got that invisible 2 in there. Square root, we're going to square both sides. So I'm going to rewrite all this. And we're going to square the right and square the left. And when we do that, when you square a square root, what happens is the square root's gone and the square is gone. And we're just left with the u minus 1 squared on the left, which is u minus 1 times u minus 1. And then on the right, all we've got is what's left under that square root, negative 3u plus 13. By the way, we squared both sides. We'll cube both sides if this is a cube root up here. But since we've got a square root, we're squaring both sides. So go ahead and FOIL. Distribute the u. Distribute the negative 1. U times u is u squared. U times negative 1. Negative 1 times u. And then negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. Okay. Most of these, so we'll go ahead and put like terms together. U squared minus 2u plus 1 equals negative 3u plus 13. Most of these won't have this, but this is a quadratic equation. We've got that u squared there. If you've got a quadratic equation, most of them will just be linear, but quadratic equations, we're going to set equal to 0. So we're going to take everything on the right side, move it over to the u squared side, and then we're going to factor. So we're going to add 3u. That's going to get rid of that on the right. We're also going to subtract 13. So that's going to be 0 on the right side now. Make sure we do that on both sides. So add 3u, subtract 13. So now we've got 0 on the right side, and we've got u squared plus 1u minus 12 on the left. So after we've set it to 0, we're going to factor the trinomial. And we haven't done this yet this 5 weeks, but hopefully you have some recollection of how to factor a trinomial. These will typically factor into 2 parentheses, still equal to 0. The first thing in both those parentheses is going to multiply to be u squared. Maybe you remember that's going to be u and u. And then the second thing in both those parentheses is going to multiply to be negative 12 and then add to be 1. So multiplies to negative 12, adds to positive 1. So negative 12, if I go ahead and list all the factors of negative 12, we've got 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And looking for a pair we can make positive 1 out of. By the way, these should multiply to be negative 12, so one of them would need to be negative. And since we wanted to add to be positive 1, negative 3 and positive 4, these multiply to negative 12 and add to 1. So negative 3, positive 4 equals 0. And then from there, you don't necessarily need to think about this too hard, but if you've got 2 parentheses that multiply to be 0, this times this equals 0. One of those parentheses has to be 0. So we would say that either u minus 3 equals 0 or u plus 4 equals 0, and then get u by itself. So add 3, u equals 3, subtract 4, and u is by itself equals negative 4. So we end up with 2 different answers. And hopefully you remember back at the beginning, we said we want to come back and check these answers. And I should put an exclamation mark on that. Check answers back at the beginning. Typically, one of the clues that you'll want to check is if you've got 2 answers. Check. Check at the beginning. And really, all you've got to do is plug it in on this left side where I circled here, u minus 1. As long as that's positive, we're okay. So if u is equal to 3, 3 minus 1 is 2. That's positive, so that's okay. If we put in negative 4 though, if you put in negative 4 minus 1, we get negative 5. So the square root cannot equal a negative, so actually we're going to toss out the negative 4 part. Do not put that in as an answer on this problem. So pretty lengthy, just to recap. We've got equation with a radical, square root, cube root. We're going to square both sides because this is a square root. When you square the right, the square root disappears. We go ahead and FOIL, so distribute the u, distribute the negative 1. And then we end up with a quadratic equation where we've got an equal sign and a u squared. Most of the time that won't happen, but here it does, so it makes the problem a little bit more complicated because you've got a factor. But that's basically it. All right, number 2. These are the pretty easy ones. So we've got square root of 7 plus 3x equals 5. So we've got an equation with a fraction. And I should have mentioned that when you've got or not with a fraction, but with a radical. When you've got an equation with a radical, you do want to get the radical by itself first. So we've got the square root. On its side, though, it's already by itself, so we don't need to get rid of anything. Then we're going to square or cube both sides. And in this case, since it's a square root, we got that invisible 2 in there. We're going to square the left side of the equals and square the right side of the equals. And like on problem number 1, when you take a square root and you square it, the square root's gone, the square is gone, and we're just left with the 7 plus 3x. And then, of course, on the right, when you square 5, you get 25. And then from there, we're just going to get x by itself, so subtract 7. Divide 3. So not too bad, hopefully. Number 3, square root of negative 8 minus 3u plus 2 equals 3. Make sure when you copy these, when you're working on them, that you copy it just like it's written. You don't want this bar to come over the 2 if it's not actually over the 2. So make sure it stops where it's meant to stop. If it stops after the negative 3u, that's how you write it. And then the plus 2 beyond that equal to 3. So we do want to get the radical by itself. So in this case, on the radical side, the left side of the equals, we've got that plus 2 along with the radical. So here's the radical, and we need to get rid of the 2. So we're just going to subtract 2. And we've got the square root of negative 8 minus 3u equals positive 1. And then it's just like example number 2. We've got the radical by itself, so we're going to square or cube both sides. Since this is a square root, we're going to square. So the square root and the square cancel each other out, and we've got negative 8 minus 3u on the left. 1 squared, 1 times 1 on the right. And then we're just going to get u by itself. So add 8. Divide negative 3. U equals negative 3. Number 4, v minus 5 equals negative 5. And you might remember at the beginning, I said that square root cannot equal negative. And here it does. We've got the square root on the left equal to a negative 5. No solution. Number 5, cube root of negative 4 minus y equals negative 3. So we do want to get the radical by itself. On all of these, and the radical on the left, there's nothing else with it. We don't have like a negative 2 out beyond the radical on the left side. So that's a lot of times already done, so we don't have to do anything there. Like I said on number 4, the square root cannot equal to a negative. This one is equal to a negative, but you'll notice it's not a square root. It's a cube root, so we don't have to bother with that. So I'll go ahead and write that again. Square root cannot equal negative, but doesn't apply here because it's not a square root. And getting the radical by itself, we didn't have to do. And then at this point, we're going to square or cube both sides. So in this case, so far we've been squaring both sides, but since it's a cube root, we're going to cube both sides. So I'm going to rewrite this. And we're going to cube the left and cube the right. So same as when you square a square root, the cube and the cube root cancel each other out. So we've got -4 minus y equals, and be careful you don't think of that on the right as 3 times 3. It's -3 times -3, which is 9, times another -3, which is -27. So be careful on this one. Then we're just getting y by itself, so we add 4. Negative y equals -23. And we want to get y by itself, so you can divide by -1. You can change all the signs. We've got that invisible 1 there, so I'm going to divide by -1. So hopefully not too bad. That's basically it for the lesson. Make sure you message me if you have any questions, and also you can bring questions to class next time we meet. Good luck.